The $5 bill shook in his hand like a dying leaf. Rain hammered the streets of Philadelphia, not the soft kind that whispers against windows, but the violent type that stings exposed skin and turns gutters into rivers. The city kept moving. Cars hissed past on slick asphalt. Neon signs blurred into watercolor streaks. Nobody stopped, nobody looked. But under the sagging awning of an abandoned pawn shop, 7-year-old Tavion stood frozen, clutching that crumpled bill like it was the last piece of hope in the world. His sneakers were soaked through. His thin jacket clung to his shoulders. Brown eyes, too old for a child's face, darted between the street and the figure slumped behind him. His parents sat against the brick wall, knees pulled tight to chest, one trembling hand pressed against a swollen stomach. The Omega's name was Kaine, male, pregnant, and completely silent. Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Not silent by choice, silent because his throat bore scars, thin white lines that caught the dim light like accusations. Someone had carved away his voice and left him breathing. Kaine's hoodie was drenched. His scent, normally soft, calming, had turned sharp with fear and exhaustion. 16 weeks pregnant, 4 months, far enough that the sickness had passed, but close enough that every movement felt like a risk. Tavion watched his parents shiver and made a decision that would change everything. A black SUV rolled up to the curb. No headlights, no sound, just shadow moving through rain. The door opened. A man stepped out. Tall, broad shoulders, black suit tailored so perfectly it looked like armor, dark skin, sharp jawline, eyes the color of cold steel. He didn't hurry, didn't look around nervously, didn't flinch when rain hit his face. Because fear was something other people felt. His name was Darius Kane, Alpha, Mafia boss, the kind of man whose reputation arrived before he did. People in East Philadelphia whispered his name like a curse they didn't want answered. Tavion's instincts screamed to run. But Kaine was shaking so hard his teeth chattered, and Tavion didn't have anyone else to ask. So he stepped into the rain, walked right up to the monster, and held out $5 with fingers that wouldn't stop trembling. "Mister, please." Darius looked down, his gaze dropped to the bill, then to the boy's face. No expression, just cold assessment. Nobody approached Darius Kane without permission. Men had been buried in the river for less. But Tavion didn't know the rules. Tavion only knew his parent was dying. "My mom, my Omega parent, he can't talk." The words tumbled out fast, tripping over each other. "He's sick, he's pregnant, people are hunting us. I don't have money, but I'll give you everything if you help him. Please." Darius didn't move. Didn't speak. Just stared. Then Tavion said the sentence that shattered everything. "He wrote your name on my hand earlier, Darius Kane, like you were the only person who could save him." Darius froze. Not like someone surprised. Like someone shot. Because only one Omega in the entire city had ever written his name like that. The Omega he'd promised to protect years ago. The Omega who'd vanished without a trace. The Omega whose disappearance had haunted him through every sleepless night since. Darius slowly turned his head toward the figure under the awning. Toward Kaine. Their eyes met across the rain. Kaine's breath caught, his hand tightened over his stomach. Terror spiked through his scent so sharp that even Tavion flinched backward. Darius took one step forward. Kaine pressed harder against the wall, like he wanted to disappear into the bricks. But Darius recognized that scent, recognized those eyes, recognized the way Kaine's left hand trembled just slightly more than his right. Darius lowered himself into a crouch so he wasn't towering over them. His voice came out softer than anyone expected. "Kaine, is it really you?" Kaine's throat moved, his lips parted, nothing came out. Because nothing could. But his eyes, wide, terrified, desperate, said everything. Kaine's hands wouldn't stop shaking. Darius stayed crouched in the rain, his expensive suit soaking through, and for 3 full seconds nobody moved. Water ran down his face. Thunder rolled overhead. The city noise faded into background static. Tavion looked between them, sensing something massive and unspoken hanging in the air. Darius spoke again, quieter this time. "How long have you been running?" Kaine's jaw clenched, he couldn't answer. Tavion answered for him. "Months, maybe longer. He won't write it down anymore because he's too scared." "Scared of what?" Tavion's voice cracked, a man named Sealer's Grey. The temperature dropped. Darius didn't shout, didn't curse, didn't move, but something behind his eyes turned lethal, the kind of cold that doesn't need violence to communicate death. Say that name again. Sealer's Grey, Tavion's voice barely made it past his lips. He's the one hunting us. He said Mom belongs to him. He hurt him. He said if Mom runs again, Tavion's face crumpled. He said he'll cut the baby out. Kaine flinched so violently, he almost folded in on himself. Darius stood slowly. Rain dripped from his coat. His voice stayed level, controlled, terrifying in its calmness. How long has Sealers been after you? Tavion wiped his eyes. Since before I was born, but it got worse 6 months ago. Darius looked at Kaine again, really looked, saw the exhaustion carved into his face, the way his spine curved protectively around his stomach, the faint bruises on his wrists that hadn't fully healed. And he saw the scars on Kaine's throat. Darius knew those scars. He'd seen them once before, years ago, in a different life, when he'd pulled Kaine out of a trafficking ring and promised him safety. And then Kaine had disappeared the same night. Darius had searched for months, found nothing, assumed the worst, blamed himself. Now here Kaine was, alive, pregnant, mute, and hunted by someone Darius knew. Someone Darius had spared once. Darius turned to his men waiting by the SUV, his voice cut through the rain like a blade. Get them inside, now. One of his men hesitated. Boss, we don't. Darius's eyes snapped to him. Now. The man shut his mouth and moved. Tavion grabbed Kaine's arm, trying to help him stand, but Kaine's legs wouldn't cooperate. Fear had locked his muscles. Trauma had stolen his strength. Darius stepped forward and held out his hand. Kaine stared at it like it might burn him. I'm not him, Darius said quietly. I'm not Sealer's, and I won't let him touch you again. Kaine's eyes filled with tears that didn't fall. Slowly, so slowly it hurt to watch, Kaine reached out and took Darius's hand. The moment their skin touched, Kaine's scent shifted, still afraid, still broken, but underneath it all something fragile and desperate, hope. Darius pulled him to his feet carefully, like handling glass. Inside the SUV, warmth wrapped around them like a blanket. The leather seats were soft. The air smelled clean. Tavion sat between Kaine and the window, eyes wide, still clutching that $5 bill. Kaine pulled Tavion close, one arm around his shoulders, the other hand never leaving his stomach. Darius sat across from them, watching. Where were you headed? Darius asked. Tavion answered, nowhere, we've been moving every night, sleeping in alleys, eating whatever we can find. When did you last eat? Tavion looked down, 2 days ago. Darius's jaw tightened. He pulled out his phone, typed something fast, then looked up. You're going to a hospital. Kaine's eyes went wide. He shook his head violently. No hospitals, Tavion translated. They'll find us. Sealers has people everywhere. Not everywhere, Darius said. Not where I'm taking you. Kaine shook his head again, panic rising. Darius leaned forward slightly. Listen to me. You're pregnant. You're malnourished. You need medical care. I own the hospital we're going to, private wing. No records unless I say so. No one gets in without my permission. Kaine stared at him, searching his face for lies. Darius met his gaze without blinking. I swear on my blood, no one touches you again. Kaine's lips trembled. Tavion whispered, Mom, I think we can trust him. Kaine closed his eyes. A single tear slipped down his cheek. Then he nodded. The SUV pulled away from the curb and disappeared into the rain-soaked streets. 20 minutes later, they arrived at a sleek glass building with no visible signs, the kind of place that didn't advertise because it didn't need to. Inside, a doctor waited, middle-aged woman, calm eyes, no questions. She led Kaine to a private room, while Darius stayed with Tavion in the hallway. Tavion finally spoke, Why are you helping us? Darius didn't answer right away. Then, because I made your parent a promise once, and I failed to keep it. What promise? That no one would ever hurt him again. Tavion looked up at him. You knew him before. Yes. What happened? Darius's eyes went distant. Someone took him from me. Inside the examination room, the doctor worked quietly. She checked Kaine's vitals. listened to his heartbeat, pressed gently against his stomach. Then she placed a small device against his belly. A sound filled the room. Steady, rhythmic, fast. Thump, 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 thump. The baby's heartbeat. Kaine's breath hitched, his hands flew to his mouth. Tears streamed down his face, silent, uncontrollable. The doctor smiled softly. Strong heartbeat, 16 weeks along, baby's doing well considering everything. Kaine sobbed without sound. The doctor handed him a tissue. I need to ask about the father, for medical records. Kaine's entire body went rigid. His hands started shaking again. The doctor noticed immediately, you don't have to answer now. But Kaine reached for the pen and paper on the table. He wrote slowly, each letter carved with pain. Silas Gray is the father. He forced it. He said the baby would chain me forever. The doctor's face went pale. She stepped outside and found Darius. Showed him the note. Darius read it once. Then his eyes went completely blank. Darius handed the note back without a word. The doctor waited for a reaction, anything, rage, shock, disgust. She got nothing. Just cold, controlled silence. Then Darius walked into Kaine's room. Kaine sat on the examination table, arms wrapped around himself, staring at the floor. Tavion stood beside him, one small hand resting on his parent's knee. Darius closed the door. Kaine's head lifted slowly. Darius crossed the room and stopped 3 feet away, close enough to be heard, far enough to not be a threat. I need you to listen carefully, Darius said. Silas Gray will never touch you again. Not you, not your child, not Tavion, do you understand? Kaine's eyes searched his face. I'm not asking you to believe me yet, Darius continued, but I'm telling you the truth. You're under my protection now. That means hospitals can't report you, police can't touch you, and Silas, his voice dropped. Silas won't survive what's coming. Kaine's breath caught. Tavion looked up at Darius. You're really going to protect us? Yes. Why? Darius glanced at Kaine. Because I owe him. Kaine shook his head quickly, signing something in rough gestures. Tavion translated. He says you don't owe him anything. I do, Darius's voice was firm. I promised you safety once. Someone took that from you. I should have found you sooner. Kaine's eyes filled with tears again. Darius looked at the doctor. What does he need? Rest, food, fluids, stress reduction. She paused. And safety. Constant stress is dangerous for the pregnancy. He'll have all of it. The doctor nodded and left. Darius pulled out his phone and made a call. Marcus, I need the penthouse prepped, full security, medical supplies, food stocked, and I want surveillance on every camera within 6 blocks. A pause. Now. He hung up and looked at Kaine. You're staying with me. Kaine's eyes went wide. He shook his head. It's not a request, Darius said. It's the safest place in the city. Silas doesn't know about it. No one does except my inner circle. Tavion tugged Darius's sleeve. What about school, my stuff? We'll handle it. What if Silas finds out where we are? Darius crouched down to Tavion's level. If Silas gets within a mile of you, he's a dead man. Understand? Tavion nodded slowly. Kaine reached for the pen again. His hand shook as he wrote. What if you can't stop him? Darius read it, then he looked Kaine directly in the eyes. I've killed men for less than what he did to you. He won't be an exception. Kaine's breath came faster. Darius stood. The penthouse is ready. We leave in 10 minutes. As they prepared to go, the doctor pulled Darius aside. He's malnourished, dehydrated, showing signs of severe trauma. If his stress levels don't stabilize, we could be looking at preterm labor. How long does he have? Hard to say, but every day counts. Darius nodded once. He'll be safe now. The doctor hesitated. Safe isn't the same as healed. I know. Back in the room, Kaine stood slowly, wobbling slightly. Tavion steadied him. They walked out together, Darius in front, Kaine and Tavion behind, flanked by 2 guards who appeared from nowhere. The SUV waited outside. As they drove through the city, Tavion stared out the window. Where's the penthouse? Downtown, 40th floor, bulletproof glass, private elevator. Sounds expensive. It is. Tavion looked at Darius. Why are you really doing this? Darius glanced at Kaine in the rearview mirror, because some debts don't expire. They arrived at a building that looked like it belonged in a movie. Sleek, modern, intimidating. Inside the lobby, people stepped aside when they saw Darius. The elevator ride was silent. When the doors opened, Tavion's mouth fell open. The penthouse stretched out like a palace, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, furniture that looked too nice to sit on, a kitchen bigger than any apartment Tavion had ever seen. Kaine stood frozen in the doorway. Darius gestured inside. Guest rooms are down the hall, bathrooms stocked, kitchens full. If you need anything, tell Marcus. A man appeared, tall, dark-skinned, serious face. I'm Marcus, head of security. Tavion waved nervously. Marcus nodded once, then disappeared. Darius looked at Kaine. You're safe here, get some rest. Kaine's lips moved, forming words his voice couldn't make. Darius understood anyway. You're welcome. Kaine and Tavion walked down the hall together, disappearing into one of the guest rooms. Darius stood alone in the living room, staring out at the city lights. His phone buzzed. A message from Marcus. Silas Gray just made a withdrawal from his account. Large amount, looks like he's preparing something. Darius typed back. Track him, I want to know every move he makes. He pocketed the phone and poured himself a drink. Somewhere out there, Silas was planning his next move. But Darius was already 3 steps ahead. The baby's heartbeat filled the silence like a promise. Thump thump, thump thump, thump thump. Kaine lay on the hospital bed, eyes locked on the monitor, watching the tiny flutter of movement inside him. 16 weeks, 4 months, a life growing despite everything trying to destroy it. The doctor, Dr. Simmons, adjusted the ultrasound wand gently. Baby's measuring right on track, heart rate is strong, everything looks healthy. Kaine's chest heaved with silent sobs. Tavion stood beside him, gripping his parent's hand. See, Mom, the baby's okay. Dr. Simmons smiled softly. I'll print some images for you. She stepped away to the machine. Darius stood near the door, arms crossed, watching. Dr. Simmons returned with the printouts and handed them to Kaine. For the record, I'll need some information about the pregnancy. Due date calculations, family history, and, she paused, information about the father. Kaine's entire body went rigid. His breathing quickened, his hand tightened around Tavion's so hard the boy winced. Mom, Dr. Simmons noticed immediately. We can skip that for now. But Kaine reached for the pen on the side table. His hand shook violently as he wrote. Dr. Simmons waited. When Kaine finished, he shoved the paper toward her and turned his face away. Dr. Simmons read it. Her expression shifted from calm to horrified in seconds. She looked at Darius. Darius crossed the room in 2 strides and took the paper. He read it once. Silas Gray is the father. He forced it. He said the baby would chain me forever. He said I'd never escape. Darius's face didn't move. Didn't twitch. Didn't show a single emotion. But his knuckles turned white around the paper. Dr. Simmons spoke carefully. Kaine, I need to ask, are you in immediate danger? Kaine nodded. Do you want to press charges? Kaine shook his head violently. Why not? Kaine grabbed the pen again. Silas owns half the police. They'll find me. They'll take Tavion. I can't risk it. Dr. Simmons's jaw tightened. I understand. Darius folded the paper slowly. Doctor, could you give us a moment? Dr. Simmons hesitated, then nodded and left. The door clicked shut. Darius walked over to Kaine's bedside. He didn't sit, didn't touch him, just stood there, holding the paper like it weighed 1,000 pounds. How long? Darius asked quietly. Kaine didn't answer. How long has Silas had you? Kaine's lips trembled. He picked up the pen again. 3 years. Darius's jaw clenched. And the baby. He planned it. Said it would keep me. Tavion looked up at Darius. What are you going to do? Darius didn't answer right away. Then he said, I'm going to make sure Sealer's Grey never hurts anyone again. Kaine's eyes snapped to his face. Darius met his gaze. You don't have to be afraid anymore. Kaine shook his head and wrote frantically. You don't understand. He's dangerous. He'll kill you. Darius read it, then he looked at Kaine with something almost like amusement. Let him try. Tavion tugged Darius's sleeve. Mister, are you really strong enough to stop him? Darius crouched down. Tavion, do you know what I do for a living? Tavion shook his head. I run this city, every corner, every deal, every threat, and Sealer's Grey, Darius's voice dropped, used to work for me. Kaine's eyes went wide. Darius stood. I spared him once because he begged, said he'd leave the city, disappear, start over. His voice turned cold. I should have ended him then. Kaine wrote, Why didn't you? Darius looked away, because I believed people could change. He turned back to Kaine. I won't make that mistake again. The room fell silent except for the monitor's steady beeping. Darius walked to the door, then stopped. Get some rest, you're safe here. Kaine grabbed the pen one more time. For how long? Darius looked over his shoulder. It's forever. He left. Outside the room, Marcus waited in the hallway. Boss, we've got a problem. Darius's eyes sharpened. Talk. Sealer's just made contact with someone. Our surveillance picked it up. It's who? Marcus handed him a tablet. Darius looked at the screen. A message thread, encrypted, but Darius's people had cracked it. The last message read. Found him, he's with Kaine, moving tonight. Darius's blood turned to ice. When was this sent? 10 minutes ago. Darius's voice dropped to a lethal calm. Lock down the building, double the security. No one gets in or out without my approval. Already done. And Sealers. Marcus hesitated. He's planning something, we just don't know what. Darius handed the tablet back, then we make him show his hand. He turned and walked back into Kaine's room. Kaine and Tavion looked up, startled. Darius's expression was unreadable. We need to move you, now. The warehouse smelled like rust and old blood. Kaine remembered it perfectly. 3 years ago, the night everything changed, the night Darius had pulled him out of hell and promised him safety. And the same night Sealers dragged him back into it. Now, sitting in Darius's penthouse, wrapped in a blanket that cost more than anything Kaine had ever owned, the memories clawed their way back. Darius sat across from him, silent, waiting. Tavion had finally fallen asleep on the couch, exhausted from the day's chaos, his small body curled around a pillow, breathing steady and soft. Kaine stared at his hands. Darius spoke first. You don't have to tell me. Kaine looked up. Darius leaned forward slightly. But if you do, I'll know how to end this. Kaine's throat tightened. He reached for the notepad on the coffee table. His hand hovered over the paper for a long moment. Then he started writing. 3 years ago, you found me in a trafficking ring. You shut it down. You gave me money, a safe place. You promised no one would hurt me again. Darius nodded slowly. I remember. Kaine kept writing. That night I was supposed to leave the city. Start over. But someone followed me to the bus station. Darius's jaw tightened. Sealers. He said you owed him. Said I was payment for a debt you never settled. Darius's hands curled into fists. He dragged me to a warehouse. Chained me. Cut my throat so I couldn't scream. Kaine's hand shook as he wrote the next part. He said I belonged to him now. That you'd never find me. He was right. Darius stood abruptly, packing to the window. Kaine kept writing. He kept me for 3 years. Moved me every few months. Used me. Then 6 months ago, he said he wanted a legacy. Darius turned around, eyes blazing. Kaine finished. He forced the pregnancy. Said the baby would chain me forever. Said even if I ran, I'd always come back. Darius crossed the room and crouched in front of Kaine. Why did you kill him? Kaine's eyes filled with tears. He wrote, I tried. He's too strong. And I was too weak. Darius shook his head. You're not weak. Kaine looked away. Darius gently turned his face back. You survived. You protected Tavion. You ran when you had nothing. That's not weakness. Kaine's lips trembled. Darius stood. Where's the warehouse? Kaine wrote an address. Darius pulled out his phone and sent it to Marcus. I want eyes on that location, now. He pocketed the phone and looked at Kaine. Did Silas ever mention why he took you? Why you specifically? Kaine hesitated. Then wrote. He said you loved me. Said taking me was revenge. Darius froze. Kaine kept writing. He said you once told him I was untouchable. That's why he wanted me. Darius's expression shifted, something raw and unguarded breaking through. He wasn't wrong. Kaine's eyes widened. Darius sat down slowly. 3 years ago, when I found you, I wasn't supposed to care. I was supposed to shut down the operation and move on. He paused. But I couldn't stop thinking about you. Kaine stared at him. I looked for you for 6 months after you disappeared, Darius continued. Tore apart every lead, questioned every contact, found nothing. His voice dropped. I thought you were dead. Kaine's chest heaved with silent sobs. Darius leaned forward. I'm sorry I didn't find you sooner. Kaine shook his head quickly, writing. Not your fault. It is. No. Darius reached out slowly, giving Kaine time to pull away. He didn't. Darius gently placed his hand over Kaine's. I won't fail you again. Kaine looked down at their hands. Darius is large and steady, his own small and trembling. For the first time in 3 years, Kaine felt something other than fear. He felt belief. Darius's phone buzzed. He pulled it out, read the message, and his expression went cold. What? Kaine mouthed. Darius showed him the screen. A message from Marcus. Warehouse is empty, but we found something. Photos, documents, evidence. Silas has been planning this for months. He knows you have Kaine. Darius stood. He's coming. Kaine's eyes went wide with terror. Darius turned to him, but he won't get to you. Kaine grabbed the notepad. How do you know? Darius's voice was ice. Because I'll kill him before he gets through the door. The photograph landed on the table like a bomb. Kaine's face stared back from the image, younger, thinner, eyes hollow with desperation, chains wrapped around his wrists, blood stained his shirt collar, the timestamp read 6 months ago. Darius picked it up, studying every detail. Marcus stood beside him, tablet in hand. We found 12 more like this, all dated, all documenting his captivity. Where did you find them? Silas's apartment, hidden in a safe. Darius set the photo down carefully. He kept trophies. Worse than that, Marcus swiped the tablet screen. He's been tracking Kaine's movements for weeks. Bus stations, shelters, alleyways. He knew exactly where they were the entire time. Then why wait? Marcus hesitated, because he wanted Kaine to run, wanted him desperate, wanted him to lead Silas straight to you. Darius's eyes narrowed. This was bait. Yes, and I took it. Marcus nodded grimly. Darius walked to the window overlooking the city. 40 floors below, traffic moved like glowing insects. Everything looked peaceful, controlled. But peace was an illusion. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. Darius answered, Speak. A voice slithered through the speaker, smooth, confident, venomous. "Hello, Darius." "Snealers." Darius's grip tightened on the phone. "You made a mistake calling me." Sealers laughed. "Did I, or did you make a mistake taking what's mine?" "Kaine was never yours. He is now carrying my child, marked with my scars. You can't erase that." Darius's voice dropped to ice. "I can erase you." "Big words, but we both know you're too late." "Late for what?" Sealers's voice turned gleeful. "Check your cameras, Darius, specifically the one on the 40th floor, east hallway." Darius's blood froze. He gestured to Marcus, who immediately pulled up the security feed. The screen showed the east hallway, empty except for one figure standing perfectly still. A man in a black jacket, holding a phone, smiling directly at the camera. Marcus cursed under his breath. Darius spoke into the phone, voice deadly calm. "If you take one step toward that room." "Relax," Sealers interrupted. "I'm not here for Kaine, not yet." "Then why are you here?" "To deliver a message." The man on the camera reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. He placed it on the floor. Then he walked away. The call ended. Darius stared at the screen. Marcus spoke first. "I'll send a team." "No," Darius headed for the door. "I'll get it myself." "Boss, it could be." "I know what it could be." Darius stepped into the hallway, eyes scanning every corner. His hand rested near the concealed weapon at his waist. The envelope sat exactly where the man left it. Darius picked it up. Heavy paper, expensive, sealed with red wax. He opened it. Inside was a single photograph. Tavion, asleep on the couch in Darius's penthouse. Taken tonight. From inside the apartment. Darius's heart stopped. He sprinted back to the penthouse, slamming through the door. Kaine looked up, startled. Tavion still slept on the couch, exactly where Darius left him. But the window behind the couch was open. Just an inch. Darius crossed the room in 3 strides and checked the lock. Intact, undamaged. Which meant someone had a key. Or someone was already inside when they arrived. Marcus appeared in the doorway. "Boss." Darius held up the photograph. "Sweep the entire apartment, every room, every closet, every vent." Marcus's face went pale. "You think?" "Now." 4 guards flooded the penthouse within seconds, weapons drawn, moving like shadows through each room. Kaine stood frozen, clutching his stomach, eyes wide with terror. Darius walked over to him. "Stay here, don't move." Kaine grabbed his arm, shaking his head desperately. Darius gently removed his hand. "I'll protect you, I promise." The guards searched for 10 minutes. Found nothing. No one hiding, no devices, no signs of forced entry. But the photograph didn't lie. Someone had been inside. Marcus returned, buildings clean, but we checked the security footage from earlier tonight. And there's a gap, 15 minutes, right when you brought them up. Someone tampered with it. Or someone on our team did. Darius's jaw clenched. "Find them." "Already on it." Darius looked at Kaine, who was now sitting beside Tavion, one hand on the boy's shoulder, eyes never leaving the window. Darius walked over and crouched down. "We're moving you again." Kaine shook his head. "This location is compromised." Kaine grabbed the notepad. "Everywhere is compromised. He's always watching." "Not where I'm taking you." "Where?" "Somewhere even I don't stay." Kaine's eyes searched his face. Darius stood. "Pack light, we leave in 5 minutes." As Kaine woke Tavion and gathered their few belongings, Marcus pulled Darius aside. "Boss, if Sealers has someone inside our operation, then we operate outside it." "What's the plan?" Darius's voice was cold steel. "We disappear, and when Sealers comes looking, we make sure he never finds us. And then we hunt him." Marcus nodded once and left. Darius looked back at Kaine and Tavion, both scared, both exhausted, both depending on him. He'd failed Kaine once. He wouldn't fail again. But deep down, a question gnawed at him. If sealers could get inside his building, inside his home, inside his life, where could they possibly hide? The lights died at exactly 2:17 a.m. 1 second, the hospital wing glowed with sterile brightness. The next, everything plunged into black. Emergency backup lights flickered on, red and dim, casting long shadows down the hallway. Kaine sat up in bed, heart hammering. Tavion stirred beside him. "Mom." Kaine grabbed his son and pulled him close. The machines around them beeped steadily, running on backup power. The baby monitor showed a strong heartbeat. But something felt wrong. The air changed. Cold crept in through the vents. And underneath it, a scent. Alpha pheromones, aggressive, territorial, familiar. Kaine's entire body locked with terror. He knew that scent. Footsteps echoed in the hallway. Slow, deliberate, confident. Kaine scrambled off the bed, pulling Tavion behind him. He looked around desperately for an exit. One door, locked from the outside for safety. One window, 40th floor. No escape. The footsteps stopped outside the door. The handle turned. The door opened. Silas Gray stepped into the room, flanked by 2 men. He wore a dark suit, his hair was slicked back. His face was handsome in a cruel way, sharp features, cold eyes, predator's smile. He looked at Kaine the way someone looks at property. "Hello, sweetheart." Kaine pressed Tavion behind him, shaking his head frantically. Silas tilted his head. "What's wrong? Not happy to see me?" He took a step forward. Kaine took a step back. "You've caused me a lot of trouble," Silas continued, voice smooth and poisonous. "Running away, hiding, making me chase you across the city." Tavion peeked out from behind Kaine. "Leave us alone." Silas's eyes flicked to the boy. "Ah, the little hero, the one who gave away my omega to Darius Kane." He smiled. "Brave but stupid." Tavion's hands curled into fists. "He's not yours." "Oh, but he is." Silas reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded paper. "See this, contract, signed 3 years ago, says your parent belongs to me." Kaine's eyes widened. Silas unfolded it slowly. "He agreed to stay with me, serve me, bear my children. In exchange, I wouldn't kill you." Tavion looked up at Kaine. "Mom, is that true?" Kaine's face crumpled. He nodded. Silas laughed. "So you see, boy, your parent chose this. Chose me, chose to carry my baby." Tavion's voice cracked. "He didn't choose anything, you forced him." "Details," Silas tucked the paper away. "Either way, he's coming with me." Kaine shook his head violently. Silas's smile vanished. "I wasn't asking." He lunged forward and grabbed Kaine's wrist, yanking him away from Tavion. Kaine tried to scream, but no sound came out. Tavion threw himself at Silas, fists swinging. "Let him go." Silas raised his hand and swung it down toward Tavion's face. But the blow never landed. A hand caught Silas's wrist midair. Strong, unyielding, like iron. Silas's eyes widened. Darius stepped out of the shadows near the door. His face was perfectly calm. His eyes were death. "You just made your last mistake." Silas tried to jerk his hand free. Darius didn't let go. "Let me tell you how this ends," Darius said quietly. "You leave this room in a body bag, or you leave in handcuffs, your choice." Silas laughed nervously. "You can't touch me, I have connections, lawyers, protection." Had Darius corrected, past tense. Silas's smile faltered. Darius continued, voice cold and factual. "While you were sneaking into my building, my people were dismantling yours. Every bank account, frozen, every contact, turned, every safe house, raided." Silas's face went pale. "You're alone," Darius said, "and you're done." Silas tried to pull free again. Darius twisted his wrist, just enough to make him gasp in pain. You hurt a pregnant omega. You threatened a child. You forced yourself into someone's life and tried to chain them with a baby. Darius leaned in close. You took his voice. His grip tightened. Tonight you lose yours. Silas's eyes went wide with real fear. Darius released him, then slammed him against the wall so hard the building shook. Silas's men moved forward. Marcus appeared behind them, weapon drawn. Don't. They froze. Silas coughed, trying to laugh through blood. You won't kill me, not here, not in front of them. Darius glanced at Kaine and Tavion. Kaine's eyes were filled with tears, his body trembling. Tavion clutched his parent's hand, terrified but refusing to look away. Darius turned back to Silas. You're right, I won't kill you. Relief flashed across Silas's face. Darius stepped back. I'll let the law do it. Marcus pulled out handcuffs. Silas's face twisted with rage. You think the law will touch me? I own half the judges in the city. Owned, Darius corrected again, past tense. He pulled out his phone and showed Silas the screen. Video footage, audio recordings, financial records, testimonies from victims, evidence spanning 3 years. Everything. Silas's face drained of color. Federal investigators received all of this an hour ago, Darius said. They're waiting downstairs. Silas's knees buckled. Marcus cuffed him roughly and dragged him toward the door. As they passed Kaine, Silas looked at him one last time. This isn't over. Darius stepped between them. Yes, he said quietly, it is. Marcus hauled Silas out. The room fell silent, except for the steady beep of the baby monitor. Tavion collapsed against Kaine, sobbing. Kaine wrapped his arms around his son, tears streaming down his face. Darius stood near the door, giving them space. After a long moment, Kaine looked up at him. Their eyes met. Kaine mouthed 2 words. Thank you. The courtroom smelled like old wood and broken promises. Kaine sat in the gallery, Tavion beside him, both wearing clothes Darius bought them. Clean, new, still feeling like borrowed lives. 2 weeks had passed since Silas's arrest. 2 weeks of statements, evidence reviews, testimonies. And today was sentencing. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s, looked down at Silas with open disgust. Silas sat in the defendant's chair, hands cuffed, face blank. His expensive suit couldn't hide what he'd become. Small, powerless, finished. The prosecutor stood. Your Honor, the evidence against Mr. Gray is overwhelming. 3 counts of kidnapping, multiple counts of assault, coercion, human trafficking, and sexual assault resulting in forced pregnancy. Kaine's hand tightened around Tavion's. We're also charging him with conspiracy, bribery of public officials, and obstruction of justice. The judge reviewed the documents in front of her. Silas's lawyer, a nervous man who looked like he wanted to be anywhere else, tried to speak. Your Honor, my client maintains. Your client, the judge interrupted, maintained nothing, he confessed. The lawyer shut his mouth. The judge looked at Silas. Do you have anything to say before sentencing? Silas lifted his head. For a moment, his eyes found Kaine in the gallery. Kaine flinched. Silas smiled. I regret nothing. The courtroom erupted in angry whispers. The judge slammed her gavel. Order. Silence fell. She looked at Silas with cold finality. Then you'll have plenty of time to reconsider. She read the sentence. 25 years, no parole. Silas's face stayed blank, but his hands curled into fists. Guards hauled him to his feet. As they led him out, he looked back at Kaine one last time. Not with anger. With ownership. Like he still believed Kaine belonged to him. Darius, sitting 2 rows behind Kaine, noticed. His jaw tightened. After the trial, Kaine and Tavion waited outside the courthouse. Darius joined them. It's over, Darius said quietly. Kaine pulled out his notepad. Is it really? Darius understood. He's locked away, he can't touch you. He said it wasn't over. He's trying to scare you, that's all he has left. Kaine looked down at his stomach, now visibly swollen at 22 weeks. He wrote, "What about the baby?" Darius crouched down in front of him. That baby is yours, not his. Biology doesn't change that. Kaine's eyes filled with tears. Tavion spoke up. What happens now? Darius stood. Now you heal. Where do we go? Darius glanced at Kaine, then back at Tavion. That's up to your parent. Kaine stared at him. Darius continued, you can stay in the penthouse as long as you need, or I can set you up somewhere else. New city, new identity, whatever you want. Kaine wrote, why are you doing this? Darius's expression softened. Because 3 years ago I promised you safety. I failed. I'm not failing again. Kaine hesitated, then wrote, you don't owe me anything. I do. Why? Darius looked away, choosing his words carefully. Because when I found you 3 years ago, I didn't just see someone who needed help. He looked back at Kaine. I saw someone worth protecting. Kaine's breath caught. Darius straightened, take your time deciding, no pressure. He started to walk away. Kaine grabbed his sleeve. Darius stopped. Kaine wrote quickly. Can we stay? With me? Kaine nodded. Are you sure? Kaine wrote. For the first time in 3 years, I feel safe. I don't want to lose that. Darius looked at him for a long moment. Then he nodded, you won't. 3 months later, at 39 weeks pregnant, Kaine went into labor. It was 3 a.m. Tavion was asleep in his room. Darius was awake, working in his office. Kaine's water broke in the hallway. He gasped silently, grabbing the wall for support. Darius heard the sound and appeared instantly. Hospital now. The labor lasted 8 hours. Darius stayed the entire time, not in the room but right outside the door, packing, waiting, refusing to leave. Tavion sat beside him, nervous and excited. Is Mom going to be okay? Yes. How did you know? Because he's strong. What if something goes wrong? Darius looked down at him, then I'll make sure nothing does. At 11:47 a.m., a baby's cry filled the air. Tavion jumped to his feet. The door opened. A nurse smiled, you can come in now. Inside the room, Kaine lay exhausted in the hospital bed, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blue. The baby's face was scrunched up, eyes closed, fists waving. Tavion approached slowly, eyes wide. Is that? Kaine nodded. Tavion looked at his baby brother, then at Kaine. What's his name? Kaine had already written it down. Elijah. Elijah, Tavion repeated softly. Hi Elijah, I'm your big brother. The baby made a small sound. Tavion laughed. Darius stood near the door, watching. Kaine looked up at him and gestured him closer. Darius hesitated, then walked over. Kaine adjusted the baby so Darius could see him better. For a long moment, Darius just stared. Then he said quietly, he's beautiful. Kaine's eyes filled with tears. Darius looked at him. You did this, you survived, you protected him, you brought him into the world. Kaine wrote with one hand. We did this. You kept us safe. Darius shook his head. You kept yourself safe, I just made sure no one stopped you. Kaine reached out and took Darius's hand. Darius looked down at their joined hands, scarred Omega and powerful Alpha. And for the first time in years, he felt something he didn't allow himself to feel. Peace. 6 months later, Elijah laughed for the first time. It happened in the penthouse living room, sunlight streaming through the windows, Tavion making silly faces, Kaine holding the baby in his lap. Elijah's face scrunched up. Then a sound bubbled out, pure, joyful, innocent. Tavion's eyes went wide. Mom, he laughed. Kaine's face lit up with silent delight. He pulled Elijah close, tears streaming down his face. Darius walked in from the kitchen, coffee in hand. What happened? Elijah laughed, Tavion announced proudly. Darius smiled, a rare, genuine expression that transformed his entire face. He sat down on the couch beside Kaine. Can I hold him? Kaine hesitated only a second, then carefully passed the baby over. Darius cradled Elijah with surprising gentleness, supporting his head perfectly. Elijah looked up at him with wide, curious eyes. Hey little man, Darius said softly. Elijah grabbed his finger. Tavion leaned against Darius's shoulder. He likes you. Good, because I like him. Kaine watched them, his two sons and the alpha who'd saved them, and felt something he thought he'd never feel again. Family. Later that evening, after the boys were asleep, Kaine found Darius on the balcony. The city stretched out below them, lights twinkling like fallen stars. Darius turned when he heard footsteps. Kaine held up his notepad. Can I ask you something? Always. Why did you really help us? Darius looked out at the city. I told you, I made a promise. But why keep it? You barely knew me. Darius was quiet for a long time. Then he said, when I was younger, I believed power was everything. Control, fear, dominance. He turned to face Kaine. But 3 years ago, when I found you in that trafficking ring, I realized something. What? That power means nothing if you're not using it to protect people who can't protect themselves. Kaine's eyes softened. Darius continued, you reminded me what strength really is. Not fear, not control, protection. He stepped closer. And when I lost you, I forgot that. I went back to being cold, ruthless, empty. And now Darius looked back toward the penthouse, where Tavion and Elijah slept safely. Now I remember. Kaine wrote, thank you for everything. Darius shook his head. Don't thank me, you're the one who survived. We survived. Together. Darius looked at him, really looked at him. And for the first time, Kaine didn't look away. Kaine, Darius said quietly, I need to tell you something. Kaine waited. 3 years ago when I found you, I thought I was just doing my job, shutting down criminals, saving victims. He paused. But you weren't just a victim to me, you were. He stopped, struggling with words he'd never said aloud. Kaine wrote, what was I? Darius met his eyes. Someone I couldn't stop thinking about, someone who made me want to be better. Kaine's breath caught. And when you disappeared, I blamed myself, thought I'd failed you, thought I'd lost my chance to. He stopped again. Kaine stepped closer and wrote, your chance to what? Darius looked down at the notepad, then at Kaine's face. My chance to tell you that you matter, that you're worth protecting, that you're. He trailed off. Kaine finished writing. Worth loving. Darius froze. Kaine held up the notepad. Darius read it, then looked at Kaine with something raw and unguarded in his eyes. Yes. Kaine's eyes filled with tears. Darius continued, I know I can't replace what Sealers took from you. I know you might never feel safe with another alpha, and I'm not asking for anything. He stepped closer. But I want you to know, you and Tavion and Elijah, you're not obligations to me, you're not debts I'm paying. His voice dropped to barely a whisper. Your family. Kaine's hands shook as he wrote. Your family too. Darius's throat tightened. Kaine set down the notepad and did something he hadn't done in 3 years. He reached out and hugged Darius. At first, Darius stood frozen, unsure. Then slowly, carefully, he wrapped his arms around Kaine and held him. Not possessively. Not desperately. Just safely. And Kaine, who'd been hurt by alphas, chained by alphas, silenced by alphas, finally felt what an alpha's touch could really mean. Protection. Not ownership. Later that night, Darius did something he'd been planning for weeks. He took the $5 bill Tavion had offered him that rainy night 6 months ago. He framed it, mounted it on the wall in his office. Not as payment, but as a reminder. Of the night a child's courage changed everything. Of the night he chose protection over power. Of the night he found his family. Spring arrived quietly. The penthouse filled with life, baby toys scattered across the floor, Tavion's drawings taped to the walls, Elijah's laughter echoing through rooms that once stood empty and cold. Kaine stood at the kitchen counter, preparing breakfast while Elijah sat in his high chair, banging a plastic spoon against the tray. Tavion rushed in, backpack bouncing. "Mom, I'm going to be late for school." Kaine handed him a lunch bag and kissed his forehead. "Love you too," Tavion said, grinning. Darius appeared in the doorway, adjusting his tie. "Ready." "Ready," Tavion grabbed his jacket. Darius had started taking Tavion to school every morning, something he'd never imagined doing 6 months ago. As they headed for the door, Darius paused and looked back at Kaine. Kaine waved. Darius smiled and left. The door closed. For a moment, Kaine just stood there, absorbing the quiet. No fear, no running, no looking over his shoulder. Just peace. Elijah made a happy sound, waving his spoon. Kaine walked over and picked him up, holding him close. He still couldn't speak. The scars on his throat remained, physical proof of what he'd survived. But he didn't need words anymore, because he was surrounded by people who listened to his silence. That afternoon, Darius returned home early. Kaine looked up, surprised. Darius held up a folder. "I have something for you." Kaine set Elijah in his playpen and took the folder. Inside were legal documents, adoption papers, custody agreements. Kaine looked up, confused. Darius explained, Silas had biological rights to Elijah. Even from prison, he could have tried to claim him later. Kaine's eyes widened in alarm. "Could have," Darius repeated, past tense. "I had my lawyers terminate his parental rights permanently. Medical grounds, abuse, coercion," the court agreed. He pointed to another document. "This one names you as Elijah's sole legal parent. No one can take him from you, ever." Kaine's hands shook as he read the papers. Darius continued, "And this one." He pulled out another document. "This one is for Tavion, legal guardianship papers. If anything ever happens to you, Tavion goes to whoever you choose." Kaine looked up at him. Darius spoke carefully. "I'm not asking, I'm not assuming, but if you trust me enough, I'd be honored to be named." Kaine stared at the papers. Then he grabbed a pen and signed without hesitation. He wrote on his notepad, "I trust you with everything." Darius looked at those words for a long time. Then he said, "There's one more thing." He pulled out a final document. "This is a lease for this penthouse, in your name." Kaine's eyes went wide. "I know you said you wanted to stay," Darius continued, "but I wanted to make sure you knew this was your home. Not mine, yours. You're not a guest. You're not dependent on me. This place is yours as long as you want it." Kaine's eyes filled with tears. He wrote, "Why are you doing all this?" Darius crouched down in front of him. "Because you deserve security. You deserve to know that no one, not Silas, not anyone, can ever take your children or your home away again." Kaine wrote, "What about you? Where will you stay?" Darius smiled slightly. "I have other properties, but..." He paused. "If you wanted me to stay, I would." Kaine's breath caught. He wrote quickly, "I want you to stay." Darius's expression softened. "You're sure?" Kaine nodded. "Why?" Kaine wrote, "Because you're family. And families stay together." Darius looked at those words and felt something break open inside his chest. For years, he'd built walls, protected himself with coldness and control. But this Omega, this broken, beautiful, courageous Omega, had quietly dismantled every single wall. Months passed. Tavion thrived in school, made friends, joined the soccer team, laughed again. Elijah grew stronger every day, crawling, then standing, then taking his first wobbly steps. And Kaine healed. Not completely, trauma doesn't vanish. But he smiled more, relaxed more, stopped flinching when Darius entered a room. Started believing, little by little, that safety could last. One evening, Kaine found Darius standing in front of the framed $5 bill in his office. Kaine walked up beside him. Darius glanced down. Do you remember that night? Kaine nodded. Tavion was so brave, Darius said quietly, offering me everything he had, trusting a stranger. Kaine pulled out his notepad. He learned that from you. Darius looked confused. From me. You taught him that strength isn't about power. It's about protecting people who need it. Darius stared at those words. Kaine continued writing. You taught me that too. Darius turned to face him. I didn't teach you anything you already knew. Kaine shook his head and wrote. I forgot. You reminded me. They stood in silence for a moment. Then Kaine wrote one final thing. Thanked you for giving us a life worth living. Darius looked at those words and felt something he'd denied himself for years. Love. Not possession. Not control. Just love. He reached out slowly, giving Kaine time to move away. He didn't. Darius gently cupped Kaine's face. You gave me a life worth living too. Kaine's eyes filled with tears. And for the first time in 3 years, he felt whole. The next morning, Tavion woke up early and ran into the living room. Darius was on the floor, helping Elijah stack blocks. Kaine sat on the couch, watching them, a soft smile on his face. Tavion flopped down beside his parent. Mom, are we staying here forever? Kaine nodded. With Darius. Another nod. Good, Tavion grinned. I like it here. Darius looked up. You do? Yeah, it feels like home. Kaine wrote and held up the notepad. Because it is home. Darius looked at them, his family, and realized something profound. He'd spent his entire life building an empire of fear. But this small, broken, healing family, was the only empire that mattered. Later that day, Darius stood on the balcony, looking out at the city he'd once ruled with iron control. Kaine joined him, Elijah in his arms. Darius glanced over. What are you thinking about? Kaine handed him a note. That sometimes the smallest act of courage changes everything. Darius looked at the $5 bill visible through the office window. Then he looked at Kaine and Elijah. And he understood. Tavion's $5 offering hadn't bought protection. It had bought hope. And hope, real hope, was priceless. Darius let the wind hit his face, and for the first time in his life, he didn't feel like a king. He felt like a man who'd finally learned what mattered. Kaine stood beside him, Elijah nestled against his chest, the baby's tiny fingers gripping Kaine's hoodie string like it was an anchor. Tavion's laughter floated in from inside the penthouse. He was chasing their dog through the living room, barefoot, carefree, loud in a way Kaine once thought he'd never allow again. Darius stared at the skyline. All my life, he said quietly, I thought the only way to survive was to be harder than the world. Kaine tilted his head, listening. Darius's voice softened, but then that night happened. The rain, the $5, that kid walking straight up to me like he wasn't afraid. He glanced over his shoulder and watched Tavion slip on the rug and burst into laughter anyway. Darius shook his head with a faint smile. He didn't know what I was, he didn't care, he just cared about you. Kaine's eyes shimmered. Darius exhaled slowly, and it reminded me fear is cheap, anybody can rule with fear, but love, his throat tightened slightly, love is the only thing that makes power worth anything. Kaine reached into the pocket of his sweats and pulled out his notepad. He wrote slowly, carefully, then held it up. You didn't just save us. You gave us the chance to live. Darius stared at those words like they were heavier than gold. Then he took the notepad from Kaine's hands and flipped it to a clean page. Kaine blinked in surprise. Darius wrote something back. His handwriting was rough, not graceful like Kaine. It looked like a man who didn't write often, but every word carried weight. You didn't just give me a chance to protect someone. You gave me a reason to be human again. Kaine's lips trembled. He swallowed, his throat visibly working, and for the first time, just for a moment, his scarred vocal cords tried. A sound came out. It wasn't a word. It was soft, broken, unfinished. But it was real. Darius froze. Kaine's eyes widened as if he couldn't believe what he'd just done. Tears spilled down his face. He pressed a hand to his throat, shaking, almost scared of his own sound. Darius stepped closer, slowly, gently, like he was approaching something sacred. Kaine, he whispered. Kaine tried again. A rough breath, a faint, rasping sound like wind through cracked stone. Not a full word. But it was a start. Darius lifted his hand, stopping just inches away from Kaine's cheek, giving him the choice. Kaine leaned into the touch, and Darius cupped his face carefully, thumb brushing away tears. You're healing, Darius said, voice thick, even when you don't think you are. Kaine closed his eyes and nodded. Elijah fussed softly, sensing the emotion, and Kaine kissed the baby's forehead until he settled again. Inside, Tavion suddenly ran onto the balcony like a storm. Mom, Darius, look. He held up a drawing, crayon on paper, messy and bright. 3 stick figures and a baby. One tall figure in black, one smaller figure with a scarf around his neck, and 2 kids holding hands between them. Above it, Tavion had written in shaky letters, "My family." Darius's chest tightened so hard it almost hurt. Kaine reached out and pulled Tavion close, pressing a kiss to his hair. Tavion grinned. I made you guys big because you're both kinda scary. Darius actually laughed, low and real. Tavion kept going, but like scary in a good way, like if somebody tries something, they'll regret being born. Darius smirked. That's accurate. Kaine's shoulders shook silently. He was laughing too, even without sound. Tavion pointed to the baby stick figure. And that's Elijah. I made him small because he's a tiny potato. Elijah babbled as if offended. Tavion gasped dramatically. See, he agrees. Kaine wiped his eyes and wrote on the notepad quickly, holding it up for Tavion to read. You're the reason we're all here. You saved me too. Tavion blinked, suddenly emotional. I didn't save you, he said quietly. I was just scared. Kaine shook his head. Tavion swallowed. I thought if I didn't do something, you'd die. Kaine hugged him tighter. Darius watched them and felt that familiar coldness inside him, his old life, his old self, shrink until it was nothing more than a shadow. Because this was what he'd been missing. Not money, not control. Not the fear people had of him. This, a child's courage. A survivor's trust. A baby's laughter. A home that wasn't built on violence, but on safety. Later that night, after Tavion went to bed, and Elijah finally fell asleep, Kaine walked into Darius's office. The framed $5 bill hung on the wall behind the desk. Darius stood in front of it like it was a shrine. Kaine came up beside him barefoot, wrapped in one of Darius's oversized hoodies. Darius spoke without looking away. Do you know why I framed it? Kaine nodded, then hesitated and wrote. Because it reminds you of that night. Darius shook his head slowly. It reminds me that I almost became the kind of man who could have ignored you. Kaine's expression faltered. Darius turned to face him. I've done terrible things, Kaine. I've hurt people. I've taken from people. I used to believe the world was a battlefield, and the only way to win was to crush whoever stood in your way. Kaine's eyes softened. He didn't flinch. He didn't retreat. He listened. Darius stepped closer, but that night, when Tavion held out that $5, I realized something. Kaine wrote. What? Darius's voice dropped, that even monsters get a choice. Kaine's breath caught. Darius continued. I could have stayed cold. I could have walked away. I could have let fear rule me. He touched Kaine's hand, but instead I chose you. Kaine swallowed hard and wrote slowly. And I choose you too. Darius stared at the words. Then he pulled Kaine into his arms. And for the first time, Kaine didn't tense, didn't freeze, didn't brace for pain. He rested his head against Darius's chest. Safe. Darius kissed his forehead like a vow. You're not property, Darius whispered. You're not a debt, you're not a trophy. Kaine's fingers clutched the back of Darius's shirt. Darius tightened his hold. You're home. Kaine's eyes filled again, but this time the tears were different. They weren't fear. They weren't grief. They were relief. The kind of relief that only comes when the body finally believes the danger is over. The kind of relief that says, I survived. Weeks turned into months. Seasons changed. And the thing Kaine feared most, Seela's returning, never happened. Because Seela's Grey didn't get a second chance. Prison swallowed him whole. His name became poison. His power evaporated. And the city learned something it had never seen before. Darius Kane wasn't just a man people feared. He was a man who protected. A year later, Tavion stood in a school auditorium with a paper crown on his head, reading from the stage for a class presentation. He cleared his throat and looked into the crowd. Kaine sat beside Darius in the front row, Elijah in Kaine's lap, bouncing happily. Tavion smiled. My story is about a hero, Tavion said. Darius raised an eyebrow. Tavion continued, people think heroes are the strongest, or the toughest, or the scariest. He glanced at Darius, but I learned something. The room was silent. Tavion's voice grew steadier. Heroes are the people who protect others when they don't have to. Kaine pressed a hand to his chest, overwhelmed. Tavion finished, and sometimes, heroes carry $5 and a lot of courage. The crowd laughed softly. But Kaine cried. Because it was true. That night, back in the penthouse, Tavion fell asleep holding Elijah's tiny hand. Kaine stood by the window, watching the city that once hunted him. Darius wrapped his arms around him from behind. Kaine leaned back into him. No fear. No flinch. Just warmth. Darius kissed his temple and whispered, You know what the world thinks of me. Kaine wrote without looking. I don't care. Darius smiled against his skin. Good, because what I want matters more. Kaine turned slightly. Darius's voice was quiet but certain. I want you to have a life worth living. Kaine stared at him, then lifted his notepad and wrote the final truth. Simple, powerful, complete. We already do. Because we're together. Darius read it. Then he looked at his family, Tavion asleep, Elijah breathing softly, Kaine standing beside him like a miracle that refused to die. And he understood the lesson the universe had forced into his hands that rainy night. Sometimes the smallest act of courage doesn't just change a moment. It changes a lifetime. And in a world built on fear, choosing protection is the most powerful thing you can ever do. The end. Thank you for watching this story. If it touched your heart, please subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss more stories that inspire. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your words might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. Remember, you're not defined by what happens to you, but by how you choose to respond. And sometimes, the greatest strength is choosing love when everything tells you to choose hate. See you in the next story.